I want to be clear about one thing before I explain any of the rest of it. I was there to drop off a parcel. That is the whole of my original intention. A sealed diplomatic pouch, registry destination Vethis Accord Hall, counterparty signature required, delivery window between the 14th and 16th standard hour. I had a badge, a shoulder bag, and a route card that told me to take secondary lift from docking ring 3 to the administrative level, present the pouch at the registry desk, collect a stamped receipt, and be back on my courier vessel by the 17th hour at the latest, because I had another delivery on Sorvith's second moon the following morning, and the transit window was tight. None of that happened. What happened instead is that the second registry lift was out of service. A maintenance notice on a small yellow placard, very politely worded, explaining that the car had been taken offline for pressurization, calibration, and that passengers requiring the administrative level should proceed to the ceremonial wings guest lift, which would be operating on a shared schedule with the formal function currently in progress on sub-level 4. I did not know what function was in progress on sub-level 4. This would turn out to be important. I had been working diplomatic courier routes in the continuance corridor for 14 years. In 14 years, I had delivered to Accord Hall 3 times prior. Each time, the secondary lift had worked. Each time, I had gone from docking ring 3 to the administrative level, presented my credentials at the registry desk, exchanged a few professional pleasantries with whichever clerk was on duty, collected my receipt, and returned to my vessel without incident. It was one of the more straightforward delivery points on my route calendar, which was why I had not thought to build in contingency time. I stood in front of the maintenance placard for a moment, recalculated my window. 43 minutes remaining, which was still comfortable, and found the guest lift. The guest lift was a substantial piece of infrastructure, polished bronze alloy panels, a sculpted ceiling with what I understood were traditional Aket continuance motifs pressed into the metal, soft amber lighting from concealed strips along the upper frame. The kind of lift you find in buildings that want you to know they have a budget. I wrote it down alone, my shoulder bag in front of me, checking my route card for the 3rd time, to make sure I had the right sub-level for the registry desk. The doors opened onto a corridor that was not the administrative level. It was wide enough for 6 people to walk abreast without crowding, and the floor was pale veined stone, polished to a near-mirror finish. The walls were paneled in a dark composite material with inlaid geometric patterns that caught the overhead lights and returned them in fractured amber and silver. At the far end of the corridor, maybe 40 meters ahead, a pair of tall doors stood half open, and through the gap I could hear the low, controlled sound of a large room in formal session. Murmured consultation, the occasional precise bell strike of a procedural call, the atmospheric hum of scanning equipment warming up. There was also, at a small station just inside the lift lobby, a registration desk. The person manning it was a young Aket clerk, pale blue-gray complexion, the characteristic elongated earpoint of the Eastern continuance lineages, wearing a gray formal jacket with the Accord Hall insignia on the breast. He was looking at a tablet. He did not look up when I stepped off the lift. "Name and credential badge," he said by rote, still reading. I assumed he meant me. I gave him my name. I handed over my transit badge because it was clipped to the front of my shoulder bag, and it seemed like the path of least resistance. He held it under a reader. The reader processed it. A small amber light pulsed, then went green. "Thank you, Pollock." He handed the badge back and made a notation on his tablet, all without looking up. "Proceed to the anteroom. Pre-scan is mandatory for all participants before the rite opens. If you have not filed a lineage attestation, please advise one of the floor assessors." I opened my mouth to explain that I was there for a package delivery and that this seemed like the wrong desk entirely, but he had already turned away to take a call on a secondary channel, pressing a small earpiece and murmuring something technical and urgent about a recalibration request from sub-level 2. I stood there for a moment. The route card in my hand said the registry desk was on Administrative Sublevel 4, Section C. I was, by the look of it, on Ceremonial Sublevel 4. The administrative section was section presumably accessible from this corridor, but I could not see a sign that told me which direction to walk. And the clerk was deep in his call and had stopped acknowledging my existence. Entirely. The anteroom doors were open. The corridor in both other directions was unmarked. I went to the anteroom. This, too, seemed like a reasonable decision at the time. I would find a floor assessor, explain the clerical error, get directions to the registry desk, deliver my parcel, and leave. I had 43 minutes before the lift back to docking ring 3. This was entirely manageable. The anteroom was smaller than the main hall, a high silaged waiting space with seating along 3 walls, occupied by perhaps 20 people. Most of them were alien males, various species I half recognized from continuance diplomatic rosters I had been shown during the orientation. Briefings that courier routes in this corridor require. They were dressed with what I can only describe as aggressive formality. Armor inlaid with house sigils, ceremonial sashes in house colors, the kind of attire that costs more than I make in a year and is worn with the studied ease of people who have owned expensive things since birth. Several of them were accompanied by house attendants who stood behind their seats, with the practiced stillness of people trained to be present without appearing to occupy space. They were all watching a display panel on the far wall that showed, in clean angular Aket script, a procedural countdown. 18 minutes until right commencement. No one looked at me. I was in plain courier clothing. Dark trousers, a functional jacket with my company insignia on the left breast, boots that were clean but obviously work boots, and whatever my transit badge had, told the registration system I was visibly not a continuance lord waiting to participate in a formal rite. The room processed me as background furniture and returned to its pre-ceremony consultations. I spotted a woman in a gray Accord Hall uniform standing near a side door, a floor assessor, going by the insignia on her collar, and started toward her. I was approximately halfway across the anteroom when a technician emerged from a door in the near wall, wheeled out a scanning apparatus on a low trolley, and positioned it in the center of the room. The scanning apparatus was about the size and shape of a large upright cabinet, finished in silver-gray composite, with a recessed bay at the front and a projecting reader arch above it. Blinking status indicators ran along one side in a sequence of amber pulses, their rhythm methodical and clinical, like the heartbeat of something patient and certain about its purpose. Above the reader arch, a circular display showed a slow pulse of pale blue light, standby mode. I had seen similar equipment in medical facilities along the continuance corridor, the resonance scanners they used for lineage verification in contested inheritance cases. This one was larger and more formal in its housing, the composite casing engraved with compact seal motifs. Pre-scan for all participants, the technician announced to the room at large. Participation credential scans will be conducted in order of registration. Please have your identity attestation prepared. The assessor I had been walking toward was now engaged with the technician, checking something on a shared tablet. I paused. I would wait until the pre-scan business was underway and the assessor was free, and then I would explain the situation and find the registry desk, still manageable. I was now 39 minutes before the lift window. The first 3 scans proceeded without incident. Each of the formally dressed alien males stepped into the scanner bay with the practiced ease of men who had done this before. Arms slightly extended, chin level, the specific neutral posture of someone who has memorized the correct form. The arch pulsed. The display resolved to a column of Aket script that the technician read, made a notation, and cleared. Quick, procedural, unremarkable. Each participant stepped out and returned to his seat, and the seated lords watched the results with the particular attention of men who were competitors in a process they had not yet been told the outcome of. None of the results produced anything other than a standard column of text. The technician's expression did not change across any of them. Then the assessor I had been trying to speak to finished her consultation with the technician and turned toward the room. Her eyes landed on me, the only human in a room of 20-odd Aket continuance nobility, and her expression went through several adjustments in rapid succession, ending somewhere between confusion and concern. She crossed to me quickly, keeping her voice low. "You are the Pollock courier?" "Yes," I said. "I was sent to the wrong desk by the lift clerk. I think there was a badge. Miss Reed. I need to find the administrative registry for sublevel 4, section C. I have a parcel." She looked at her tablet. She looked at me. She looked at her tablet again, with the focused attention of someone looking for an escape route in a document and not finding one. "Your transit badge was registered as a participant credential," she said. "I noticed that, yes. That's the error I was trying to explain. Your scan has been logged in the pre-write queue. That's also something I was hoping to correct." She made the expression of a person doing rapid internal calculations about risk and procedure. The calculations were visible in the small movements of her face, the slight press of the lips, the fractional narrowing of the eyes, the look of someone whose professional life requires managing small crises before they become large ones. "The queue is procedurally locked once registration opens," she said. "I cannot remove a logged entry without a formal amendment request, which requires the presiding Lord Assessor's authorization." She paused, and the calculation shifted. "If you step into the bay quickly, the system will simply process your scan as an incidental. It has never returned a positive result on a non-Aket participant. The resonance parameters for the Lorne Rite are lineage-specific. The scan will complete in 12 seconds. The result will be null, and I can flag the entry as administrative error after the fact. It will be far simpler than an amendment request." I looked at the scanner. I looked at my route card. I had 39 minutes. 12 seconds, I said. "At most," she said. I stepped into the bay. The bay was narrow, with smooth composite walls that angled slightly inward at shoulder height, designed to position a participant's upper body within the arch's optimal read radius. I stood where the worn floor markers indicated I should stand, arms slightly extended as I had watched the previous participants stand. The arch above me hummed, a low, subsonic frequency that I felt in my back molars more than I heard, and then it pulsed. One deep, resonant beat of blue light, the kind that isn't just light, that has some component of vibration in it, a pressure behind the sternum that isn't painful but isn't nothing. Then it pulsed again, brighter. Then it held. The pale blue of the standby display intensified to something closer to white, and the indicators along the side of the cabinet shifted. Not the orderly amber sequence I had watched for the 3 previous participants, but a cycling pattern, amber to gold to a deep, saturated blue-green, repeating each cycle tighter and more urgent, the way a measuring instrument behaves when it has found something that exceeds the range it was calibrated for and is trying to resolve it with the tools it has. The technician took a step back from his tablet. He said something in Aket. I caught perhaps one word in 4 of it, but the cadence, the specific cadence of a technical professional encountering a result that their professional experience has not prepared them for, was perfectly legible in any language. The display above the arch resolved. I could not read Aket script with any fluency, but I had been in enough continuance facilities over enough years to recognize certain standard format outputs. 3 lines of text, some notation in the upper register, a confirmation code in the lower. That was a standard result. The column currently on the display was not 3 lines. It was longer, formatted differently, with a bracketed header above the main body that took up more of this display than any of the 3 prior results had. The technician was staring at it with his mouth slightly open. The amber status lights along the cabinet had stopped cycling and settled on the deep blue-green, which pulsed slowly and steadily, the way a system pulses when it has completed a task and is waiting to be told what to do next. The assessor made a sound that I would describe as a quiet, involuntary exhalation of disbelief. I stepped out of the bay. Is something wrong? No, she said, in the tone of someone who means the opposite. Please, wait here. Do not leave the anteroom. She was already moving toward the main hall doors, tablet in hand, and she pushed through them without looking back. The room had gone quiet. Not the managed quiet of people maintaining decorum, but the sharper stillness of people who have just seen something that has rearranged their understanding of the next few minutes. The formally dressed alien males were all looking at the scanner display. A few were looking at me. Their expressions ranged from confusion to something that I did not yet have the cultural vocabulary to correctly identify, though I would learn, later, to call it offended disbelief. The expression of men who have spent time and resources positioning themselves within a process and have just watched that process step sideways into territory they did not account for. One of the seated lords said something to another in low, rapid Akhet. The second shook his head. A third looked at me with an expression that was less surprise than evaluation. A measuring look, the kind you turn on something that is not supposed to be a factor, and appears to have become one. I stood next to the scanner cabinet with my shoulder bag and my parcel and my route card and waited because there did not seem to be anything else productive to do. I thought about the transit window. 32 minutes. The assessor returned in under 2 minutes, but she was not alone. Behind her came 3 people in the formal gray and gold of Senior Accord Hall. Staff. The kind of rank that means real institutional weight, not just administrative function. And behind them came 2 individuals in the heavier, formal dress of Akhet Continuance House officials, silver house seal pendants, stiff structured collars, the look of people who have been pulled from something else, which does not please them, and are managing the displeasure behind professional faces. The last of the group through the door was a tall man in the deep crimson of a Lord Assessor's formal office, a color I had seen once before in a briefing document about continuance ceremony protocol, in the section that explained what a presiding officer's authority covered and what it did not. His name, I would learn shortly, was Lord Assessor Dunvith Kalori. He had been presiding over Akhet matching rights for 31 years. He was a large man, broad through the shoulder, with the specific bearing of someone who has been the most authoritative presence in most rooms for most of his professional life. The kind of posture that is not performed but accumulated. The physical record of 3 decades of being listened to. He had a face that would have been called distinguished under normal circumstances, with strong lines and clear eyes and the particular confidence that belongs to men who have seen enough difficult situations to have stopped being surprised by most of them. He looked at me. He looked at the scanner display. He looked at the assessor. He looked at me again. "This is the courier," he said. "Transit badge was misregistered at the lift desk," the assessor said. "He was processed through the participant queue in error." And the scanner ran a complete right protocol scan, the technician supplied. He was still looking at his tablet with the expression of a man who has just found something unexpected inside a very ordinary box and is not yet sure whether to be alarmed or fascinated. All resonance bands, full lineage array, standard right parameters. Kalori said something in formal Akhet, the elevated register, the kind used in official proceedings, precise and weighted. "I understood perhaps 1 word in 3, the assessor replied. One of the house officials added something, and there was a brief, urgent exchange among the 3 of them, low and controlled, the kind of conversation that is not an argument yet, but is moving in that direction. I stood where I was and tried to look cooperative and patient, which I genuinely was, because I still believed this was going to resolve into a simple administrative correction, and I was going to find the registry desk and deliver my parcel and be on the lift in 27 minutes. I had been in difficult administrative situations in continuance facilities before. They moved slowly, but they moved. Then the main hall doors opened again. She came through them alone, which I would learn later was itself a statement of significant weight. In the Akhet continuance, A princess attended the pre-rite anteroom with a minimum of 2 house attendants as a matter of custom. Not a rule, but a practice so entrenched that departing from it communicated something without requiring words. She had left hers behind. She came through the doors at a pace that was not rushed, but was also not the measured ceremonial walk of formal rite approach. And every Accord Hall official and House official and Lord Assessor in the room turned toward her. The first things I noticed was her height. She was shorter than I had expected, given the stature of most of the other Aket I had encountered. Compact, upright, precise in movement, with none of the self-conscious adjustment that sometimes accompanies a shorter person in a room full of taller ones. She moved as if her height were simply her height, neither apologized for nor compensated for. The second thing I noticed was her clothing. A formal rite dress in deep burgundy that managed to be both extremely expensive and extremely restrained, falling straight to the floor with no ornamentation except single silver embroidery at the collar and cuffs. The embroidery, on close inspection, was the Lorne lineage pattern, rendered small and precise and without display. The third thing I noticed was her face, specifically her eyes, which were the most unusual I had seen in 14 years of diplomatic courier work. Pale silver gray, large, and at this moment carrying an expression that I could only describe as carefully assembled composure over something that had not yet decided what it was. Her skin was warm bronze amber, a tone I had not encountered in the Eastern continuance lineages, which ran predominantly to cooler complexions, and which the low amber light of the anteroom caught in a way that made her seem more present than anyone else in the room. More solid, more there. Her hair was deep copper black, cut close at the sides and longer on top, held back from her face by a thin ceremonial clasp that was, I noticed, also the Lorne lineage pattern. The same pattern as the embroidery, but rendered in what appeared to be actual silver. She stopped in the center of the anteroom. She looked at the scanner display for a moment, reading the full column of text with the speed of someone for whom Aket script was as natural as breathing. Then she looked at me. Her composure did not break, but something in it shifted, the way a locked door shifts when someone turns the right key. Nothing visible to someone who wasn't paying attention, but a change of state, a subtle realignment of something that had been set one way and was now considering another. Thesivane. Kalori's voice and his tone had the precise mixture of deference and authority of a man who respects a title while currently wishing its holder were elsewhere. This is not the circumstance you have been told. I was told there was a cascade result, she said. Her voice was even, not flat. There is a difference, and it matters. Flat is what happens when someone has pressed all the feeling out. Even is what happens when someone has made a deliberate choice about what they will permit the room to see. I was told the result was on a human participant. It was an administrative error, Kalori said. The man is a courier. He was processed through the participant queue by a clerical misread at the registration desk. The scan should not have been conducted under these conditions, and the result is therefore procedurally void. The scanner ran the full rite protocol, the technician said, apparently unable to stop himself. There was something in his voice that was half apology and half something else. The professional's reluctance to see data he has correctly read be officially characterized as data that does not exist. Kalori looked at him with the expression of a man who wishes he had more control over who speaks in his vicinity. The scanner ran the full rite protocol, Thesivane repeated, in the same even tone. She was still looking at me. I was, I admit, looking back, because there was something about being the subject of that much carefully managed attention that made it difficult to look elsewhere. What is your name? Ren Pollock, I said. I'm a courier. I have a parcel for the administrative registry, sub-level 4, section C. I was sent to the wrong desk. Something happened in her expression, the faintest flicker, there and gone in a fraction of a second, too quick to fully name. If I had been told afterward that I had imagined it, I would have had no evidence to the contrary. How long have you been a courier? 14 years, I said. Mostly diplomatic routes in the continuance corridor. And you have delivered to this facility before? 3 times. The lift has always worked before. The flicker came back, slightly more visible. I would learn later that this was the closest Thessavane Lorne Aket came to laughing in formal company, a habit developed over years of needing to be composed in rooms that were rarely comfortable, and a genuine amusement response that had learned to express itself in the smallest available movements of her face. Thessavane. Kalori again, his voice carrying the additional weight of a man who has seen enough surprises to know when a conversation is moving somewhere he does not want it to go. The scan result cannot stand. There is no precedent for a non-Aket participant in the Lorne-Aket matching right. The lineage compact requires a certified continuance bloodline attested through the Aket registry. This man is not registered. He has no lineage attestation on file. He has no house affiliation. He has a resonance alignment with my Lorne marker, Thessavane said, as confirmed by the full right protocol scan, as confirmed by a scan run under improper conditions on a participant who was entered into the queue by administrative error. The scanner's certification is current. She had not raised her voice. She did not need to. The volume at which she spoke was entirely adequate, in the specific way that a thing is adequate when it is precisely calibrated to its purpose. 3 months ago, by Accord Hall's own technical record, the protocol it ran is the same protocol under which every result in this anteroom has been generated for 30 years, including the results that found no match for me across 6 prior write cycles. 6 prior cycles in which the scanner performed correctly, she said, in which it returned null results consistently and reliably, as it was designed to do when no compatible match was present. That is the baseline against which this result should be understood. A pause. The scanner has never malfunctioned before. There is no evidence it has malfunctioned today. There is only evidence that today's result is unexpected. Kalori drew a careful breath. He had the look of a man who is used to being the most prepared person in an argument and has just encountered a counterparty who is equally prepared. He changed direction. Even setting aside the procedural grounds, the compatibility of a human male with a continuance princess is the practical and political objections alone present serious. Are not yours to raise in a right proceeding, she said. The lineage compact grants the presiding assessor authority over procedural questions. It does not grant authority over the substantive eligibility of a scan result, nor does it grant authority over the bride's right of first voice. The temperature of the room, metaphorically speaking, dropped several degrees. I had not caught all of what she said. My formal Aket ran about a grade below the level of this conversation. But I had caught enough, and the effect on the room was unmistakable. Kalori's expression went carefully blank. The 2 House officials exchanged a look that contained an entire conversation. The senior Accord Hall staff had taken a collective small step backward, the physical language of people who are no longer willing to be too close to what is about to happen. Right of first voice, Kalori said carefully, selecting each word with the precision of a man who understands he is now in a negotiation rather than an argument, is a ceremonial provision. It has not been formally invoked in 47 years, she said. I know. My grandmother invoked it. The provision is current. The compact has not been amended in that period, and the right does not lapse through disuse. I had understood perhaps 50% of what had just been said. I was fairly certain that the portion I had understood was already extraordinary, and that the portion I had not understood was more extraordinary still. I was holding my parcel in front of me with both hands, the way you hold something. Whens you have run out of natural things to do with your hands, and I was trying to look like a person who was not the center of an escalating institutional confrontation, which was difficult because I clearly was. One of the House officials leaned toward Kalori and said something low and urgent. Kalori's jaw moved in the subtle way of a man applying pressure to his own molars while thinking. He was calculating, I could see it, the rapid running of variables, the assessment of what he could formally contest and what he could not, and what the cost of each was. The assessor, the young woman who had told me this, would take 12 seconds, who I was beginning to feel some sympathy for, appeared at my side with a quiet step and the professional expression of someone who has decided the best available contribution she can make is to be very still and very unobtrusive. "Lord Assessor," she said softly, "the right of first voice, if invoked, must be acknowledged in the right record by the presiding officer. It cannot be set aside by presiding authority or house petition. It is the bride's sole provision." Kalori looked at her. He looked at Thesavane. He looked at me with the expression of a man who, in 31 years of presiding over Akhet matching rights in formal chambers across the continuance corridor, had never once looked at a diplomatic courier holding a sealed saw and thought he would ever need to factor such a person into his professional considerations. "It is a formality," he said, to the room, to himself, to the universe at large, in the tone of a man who knows he is making an argument he does not have the votes to win, but who requires himself to make it anyway, even if the right is invoked. "The practical application is, the continuance houses will not recognize." "The continuance houses," Thesavane said, "have declined me 6 times. She said it without heat. It was a statement of record, nothing more. The way you state a fact that has been true long enough to lose its sting, or at least to lose its sting in public. At this right, at the previous 5 rights, the result has been consistent." Her eyes came back to me. "The scanner has never produced a cascade result in my 6 prior cycles. Not once. Not a partial alignment. Not a preliminary result. Nothing." A pause. The composure was fully in place, but there was something underneath it that was not nothing. "Today it cascaded on a courier who was in the wrong room. That fact alone," Kalori began, "that fact alone is the most interesting thing that has happened in 6 rights cycles," she said. Another pause. The room performed a masterclass in controlled stillness. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The formally dressed lords along the walls had completed their ceiling inspection and returned to a careful attentiveness that was not quite watching, and not quite not. The scanner cabinet hummed softly behind me, patient and indifferent, its blue-green indicators pulsing at the slow rate of a system that has finished its work and is waiting for the rest of the room to catch up. "Pollock," she said. "Yes," I said. "Do you understand what the scanner result means?" I thought about it honestly. I understand that it produced an output that was not expected, and that the output appears to have some bearing on this formal proceeding. I understand that the proceeding involves matching, and that the result appears to have matched me to you. I paused. I understand that this is causing a significant number of people significant discomfort, and that the Lord Assessor is arguing that the result should be set aside. I don't understand all of the formal provisions being cited, but I follow the general direction. "The general direction," she said, "is that the scanner identified you as a compatible match under the Lorne Resonance Compact, a compatibility that has been the condition of my eligibility and my unmarriageable status in alternating interpretations, depending on which house is speaking and what they want from the current cycle." A small, precise tension at the corner of her mouth, barely visible. "The Lorne marker in my bloodline has been described as a flaw, a dormant anomaly, a contamination of the 3rd daughter line, and a ceremonial technicality at different times and by different parties. What has remained constant is the scanner's inability to find an alignment for it across 6 cycles until today. The scanner's cascade indicates that your resonance pattern aligns with the Lorne marker, which means, under the compact, that you are the match the marker has been dormant for." I took a moment with that. "That's a long time for a marker to be dormant. 4 generations, she said. "Since my great-grandmother's time, and the right of first voice means that I, as the bride of the right, may accept or decline a match result, regardless of the presiding assessor's procedural determination. The right exists to prevent coercion in both directions, to ensure that a bride cannot be forced into a match she refuses, and also cannot be forced out of a match she accepts." She held the pause the right length of time. It has not been invoked because, in 6 prior cycles, there has been no result to invoke it about. Kalori had not moved. He was still present, still authoritative in his posture, but the argument had left him. He was standing in the particular stillness of a man who has run his full inventory and knows it. Thesavane. His voice had lost most of its institutional architecture. Not gentle, exactly, but stripped of performance. Almost. Not pleading, but something in the neighborhood. I ask you to consider. This man is a courier. He is human. He came here by administrative error. He has no standing, no lineage record on file, no house affiliation, no political weight in the continuance at any level. The houses alone would make this. The resistance would be Dunvith. She used his given name, which, in formal Aket proceedings between a princess and a lord assessor, was either a profound familiarity or a deliberate signal about which register the conversation had shifted into. He absorbed it without flinching. You have presided at every one of my right cycles. You know what the results have been. You know what has been said about my marker, and about my eligibility, and about whether the Lorne dormancy is a flaw in the bloodline, or simply a dormancy waiting for the right alignment. She let a breath go, measured and quiet. You have, I suspect, a reasonable idea of what has been said about me, outside the formal right record, about the likelihood of a match, about the third daughter line. His expression shifted. It was not comfortable to watch. It was the expression of a man who is guilty of nothing worse than knowing a thing was happening and choosing not to intervene, which is its own category of not nothing. The houses will not recognize the result without contest, he said. Quieter now. The formal register had dropped almost entirely. It was closer to a statement than an argument. It will not be clean. It has not been clean, she said. 6 cycles have not been clean. She paused. I am not asking for clean. I am asking for the right I am entitled to under the compact. He accepted this. Not with pleasure, but with the particular quality of acceptance that belongs to a man who has looked at what is available to him and found it insufficient to change the outcome. She turned back to me, full attention, steady and clear, no performance in it, the same directness she had brought to every word she had said since she came through the door. I am going to invoke the right of first voice, she said. I want to tell you that before I do, rather than during the formal language of the invocation, because the formal language is compressed and procedural and does not say the thing I want to say. The composure was still in place, but the thing under it was more visible now. Not distress, not urgency. Something quieter than either of those. Something that had been present for a long time and had learned to occupy a small and careful space. The last 6 cycles have had a texture, and the texture has been one of waiting for a result that does not come, and being told in formal and informal language, repeatedly, that the waiting is my condition and my fault and my inheritance, and that the correct response to it is a particular kind of dignified endurance. She paused. You stood in this room for a scanner result you did not know you were generating, and when the result came back and the room became what it became, you did not panic. You did not argue. You did not attempt to manage the situation in any direction. You waited. You answered questions when you were asked questions. You were steady. I thought about it. I couldn't find the exit sign, I said. The flicker came back to her face, more clearly this time. Not a smile, exactly. More like the shape a smile makes in the moment before it decides to commit. You waited, she said again. And then, when I asked you questions, you answered them honestly. Including one answer that was, by most formal standards of this venue, quite funny. I genuinely could not find the exit sign, I said. That part was true. I know, she said. I believe you. A breath, not audible, but visible. The small expansion and release of a person letting go of something they had been holding carefully for a long time. I am going to invoke the right of first voice, because the scanner found a match, and I choose to take the match seriously. I am not asking you to agree. The right is mine to invoke unilaterally. What happens after the invocation is a longer conversation, if you are willing to have it. What the invocation does, legally, is establish the match as a formal record of the right, which prevents the Lord Assessor from voiding it by procedural motion. I looked at her. I looked at the room. Calori, the House officials, the Assessor, the technician, the seated lords who were doing their studied non-watching with varying degrees of success. I looked at my parcel. "What happens to my delivery?" I said. She blinked, one precise blink. "I will ensure the administrative registry receives your parcel today," she said. "And the receipt? I need a stamped receipt for my route record." Something happened in the room that I can only describe as a collective, involuntary adjustment. A subtle recalibration of the assembled officials and nobility, who had been braced for a major institutional confrontation and had just been handed a question about delivery documentation. Calori looked at the ceiling. One of the House officials pressed a hand over his mouth. The assessor made the careful neutral expression of a professional who has decided she will process this moment privately, later, when she is off duty and can afford to have a full reaction. "You will receive a stamped receipt," Thessalvane said, and her voice was exactly as steady as it had been for every other thing she had said in the last 15 minutes, which was the answer in itself. I nodded. "Then I don't have an objection." The breath she let go was small and controlled, but I heard it. Lord Assessor Calori stood in the center of the anteroom for a moment that had the quality of a man waiting to see if the ground beneath him was going to remain solid. The House officials exchanged a look. The formally dressed lords along the walls had completed their ceiling study, returned to a careful attentiveness that was not quite watching us and not quite not. "Thessalvane," Calori said, once more, with the resigned authority of a man who has made all the arguments available to him. "I will note my objection in the right record." "You are entitled to do so," she said. I expect nothing less." He accepted this with the dignity of a man who has been doing difficult things for 31 years and has learned to know the difference between a thing he can change and a thing he cannot. He gestured to the senior Accord Hall official, who produced a formal right record tablet and began entering text. The sound of the stylus against the recording surface was very small in the silence. Thessalvane turned to face the room, not just me, the whole room, every official and assessor and seated lord, and she stood as she had stood throughout, straight, precise, still, with the composed authority of someone who had spent 6 cycles waiting for a moment that was, in the end, going to be entirely on her own terms. "Under the Lornaquette lineage compact," she said, and the formal register of it rang in the high-ceilinged room with the particular weight of language that has been carrying institutional force for longer than any of the people currently speaking it. "I, Thessalvane Lornaquette, third daughter of the Aket continuance, invoke the right of first voice. I confirm the right result of this cycle. I name the match as valid and the record as standing. Let the presiding assessor log the confirmation." The Accord Hall official logged it. The record light on the formal tablet pulsed green and held steady. Nobody spoke, not even Calori. The scanner cabinet hummed. The lords along the walls were all looking at me now, every one of them, with the various configurations of disbelief, assessment, and what I had learned enough Aket cultural register to identify, by this point, as reluctant recalculation. I was a courier with a parcel and a shoulder bag and a route card and a stamped receipt requirement. And the scanner had found me, and she had said so in the formal language of the compact, to a room full of lords and officials and the presiding assessor of 31 years. And that was now a fact in the right record that no procedural motion could unmake. I did not feel like an extraordinary person. I felt like a man who had taken the wrong lift on a Tuesday. But I had been a courier in the continuance corridor for 14 years, which meant I had spent 14 years moving between worlds and stations and treaty halls, delivering sealed things from one pair of hands to another. In that time I had learned, not as a philosophy, just as a practical matter, the way you learn anything by doing it long enough, that the most important thing about being in a room was being in it steadily, not commanding it, not performing in it, not managing how you were perceived in it. Just being there and tending to it, not flinching when it became uncomfortable. Most of the things I had delivered had been more important than I was, and that had never bothered me. And the steadiness that had developed from 14 years of that was not a quality I had cultivated for any purpose other than the work. It was just what happened when you spent 14 years being reliably present in rooms that were not always easy to be present in. It was the only thing I had brought into the anteroom. Apparently, it had been enough. Thesivane came to stand beside me. Not close, the appropriate formal distance of a first-right acknowledgement, the specific spacing of two people who are at the beginning of something rather than the middle of it. But beside, the assessor appeared at my other side and, very quietly, produced a small receipt scanner from her jacket pocket. "If you'd present your route card," she murmured with the professional equanimity of a woman who has decided that her job is to do her job regardless of the surrounding circumstances. I gave her the route card. She scanned it. The receipt printed. A small square of formal Accord Hall paper with the date and the registry, confirmation, and the official stamp in the corner. She handed me the route card back with the receipt attached, and I tucked both into my shoulder bag, without looking at them. Because there are moments when checking a receipt feels like exactly the wrong scale of action, and this was one of them. The procedural bell struck from inside the main hall. One clear tone. The formal mark of a right confirmation entered into record. It rang through the anteroom and down the polished stone corridor and up through the bronze alloy lift panels and out into the wider air of Vithis Station. And in the formal record of the Lornaket lineage compact, a courier named Ren Pollock was entered as the matching result of the 37th cycle rite of Thesivane Lornaket. Kalori filed his formal objection that afternoon. The continuance houses filed theirs within the week. The administrative apparatus spent the next 3 weeks generating paper at the rate administrative apparatuses generate paper when something unexpected has happened, and everyone involved wants their position documented in triplicate. I made my delivery on Sorvith's second moon the following morning. I was 12 minutes early for the transit window. There were a lot of conversations, as she had said there would be. Some of them were long. Some were difficult in the precise institutional way that continuance proceedings are difficult, which is not dramatically difficult, but is exhaustingly procedural, requiring the same arguments to be restated in slightly different formal registers for slightly different bodies with slightly different jurisdictions. The houses were exactly as invested in their objections as she had predicted, and the formal consultation process moved at the speed that such things move, which is not a fast speed, and there were 3 separate sessions before bodies I had not previously known existed that required me to provide attestations about things I had not previously been asked to attest to. I went to all of them. I answered every question I was asked, in as much formal Aket as I could manage, and in standard where I could not. I brought my route card to every session that requested documentation of my presence at the rite, because it was the only documentation I had. I had the delivery receipt in my records file, which one of the continuance officials found interesting in a way I did not entirely follow, but that apparently provided some useful precedent about the administrative chain of events. In the second session, a house legal assessor, a compact, precisely spoken man who represented 2 of the families who had declined Thesivane in prior cycles, spent 40 minutes asking me questions about human resonance biology in a tone that was technically civil and substantively skeptical. He wanted to know whether I had any prior contact with continuance scanning equipment, whether I had received any preparation before the rite, whether I had been coached about how to behave during the scan. I answered all of it, accurately and without irritation, because the questions were not unreasonable, even if the intent behind them was. I had not been coached. I had not prepared. I had stood in the bay because an assessor told me it would take 12 seconds, and I had been trying to find the registry desk. He asked, eventually, whether I understood the implications of the confirmation. I said I was working toward it. He seemed dissatisfied with this, but the formal record does not have a category for dissatisfaction, so he noted my answer and moved on. Afterward, in the corridor outside the session room, Thessavane was waiting. She was not permitted in the session, but she had been permitted to wait, which was itself a small procedural concession that I later understood she had requested formally. She fell into step beside me without preamble, and we walked down the corridor together toward the lifts. And she said, without looking at me, "He has been asking those questions at matching proceedings for 20 years. He asked them at 4 of my prior cycles, about the participants who produced null results, because he was looking for technical objections. He never found any, but the questions served other purposes." "What purposes?" I said. "They communicated that the proceedings were being watched looked closely," she said, "that any result would be examined thoroughly, that the cost of a result the houses did not want would be high." She paused. "He asked you the same questions because he is doing the same thing. The difference is that this time there is a result, and the right of first voice is on the record, and the questions are not going to change the outcome." "He seemed disappointed about that," I said. "Yes," she said. "He has been disappointed before. He will manage." It was the driest thing she had said in 3 weeks of proceedings, and it was delivered in the same even voice she used for everything. And I was fairly certain she was aware that it was dry, and that she had decided this corridor, at this moment, was a place where she could permit herself that much. Thessavane attended every session she was permitted to attend, and in the sessions where she was not permitted, those limited to the party under review, which was me, she filed written statements. I read those statements in the copies I was provided. They were precise and measured and built their case in the formal language of the compact with the methodical patience of someone who has been making careful arguments for a long time in rooms that were not designed to receive them. They did not ask for anything they were not entitled to ask for. They did not embellish. They did not flinch from the things that had been said about her marker, about her 6 prior null cycles, about the 3rd daughter line, naming them plainly and then addressing them plainly, with the specific composure of a person who has decided that the truth is not something to manage around, but something to stand next to. I had been a courier long enough to recognize steadiness when I saw it in someone else. The houses did not capitulate easily. The houses never capitulate easily in the continuance. I had worked this corridor long enough to know that institutional resistance in formal proceedings is a form of communication, and the communication the houses were sending was that they found the result inconvenient and intended to make the inconvenience felt. But the compact was clear, and the record was standing, and the right of first voice was not a provision that bent under petition, and eventually the machinery of the continuance ground through to the outcome the machinery was obligated to reach. I do not remember the exact words of the final confirmation session. I remember that it was held in a formal chamber 3 levels above the Accord Hall on Vethis Station, in a room that had more officials and a larger bank of recording equipment, and a wall of house seals rendered in the formal colors of the continuance signatory families. I remember that the senior continuance official who read the final confirmation language from a prepared document had a voice that managed to convey, in the cadence of formal acquet, that the continuance was acknowledging this result because the compact required it to, not because it had arrived at enthusiasm. I remember the sound of the recording light finding green. I remember that Thessavane sat 3 seats to my left, and that when the confirmation language was finished, and the recording light held, and the senior official closed his document and looked at the assembled room with the expression of someone who has discharged a difficult duty and is relieved to have it behind him, she turned her head and looked at me. I looked back. She said nothing. I said nothing. The rooms was filling with the low sound of people collecting their materials, and standing and moving toward the doors. And in the middle of all of that, she looked at me and I looked at her. And there was something in it that I did not yet have a name for. but that had the quality of a thing that had been waiting to be seen, and was now, quietly, being seen. We stepped out of the formal chamber into the corridor together. The corridor was broad, with good light through the windows at the far end, and outside those windows was the permanent orbital daylight of Vethus Station, the pale disk of Sorvith, turning steadily below us, patient and enormous and indifferent to proceedings. "That's done then," I said. "The formal part," she said. "The rest is longer." Yes, I looked at the planet. "I have a delivery scheduled tomorrow. Docking ring 9, 1400 lift." "I know," she said. "I checked your route calendar when the administrative office sent me the documentation file." I looked at her. "You checked my route calendar. It was in the formal file," she said, and the composure was fully present, precise and managed. But the flicker was close to the surface, closer than it had been in the anteroom, almost not hidden. "I wanted to know if you were going to keep showing up." "I'm a courier," I said. "Showing up is the job." The flicker resolved. It was not a large smile. She was not. I had come to understand over 3 weeks of sessions and documentation, and the particular intimacy of two people navigating an institutional process together, a person given to large expressions of anything. Not because she did not feel things, but because she had learned, across 6 cycles and more difficult rooms than I had been in, to hold what she felt with care and offer it when the moment was right, rather than when the pressure of it became too much. But this was a real smile, the same real smile from the anteroom, and this time it stayed. "Yes," she said. "I know. That's one of the things I've confirmed." The station hummed around us, doing the patient, indifferent work of infrastructure that does not know or care about the proceedings taking place. Inside it, the planet turned. My shoulder bag was on my shoulder, lighter, now that the parcel had long since been delivered, and my route card was in my jacket pocket, with the original stamped receipt still attached to it, because I had not been able to bring myself to file it away. She was standing next to me. The record was standing. Tomorrow I had a delivery on docking ring 9, and she had checked my route calendar, and the rest was a longer conversation, as she had said. I had come to drop off a parcel. I had found the wrong desks, and the scanner had found the right answer, and she had named it in the language of the compact, in front of a room full of lords who had not wanted to hear it. And neither of us had flinched. That seemed, for a first day, like enough to work with.